If you went to a doctor today, looked him in the eye, and told him exactly how we ate in 1975, he wouldn't just write you a prescription. He would probably call an ambulance. He would talk about cholesterol. He would talk about sodium levels. He would lecture you about processed carcinogens and trans fats. But let me tell you something about the 1970s that the medical books don't understand. We didn't have the luxury of counting calories. We didn't have apps to track our macros. We counted pennies. And we counted blessings. You have to remember the context. The 1970s wasn't just disco and bell-bottoms, it was inflation, it was gas shortages, it was factories closing down. For Black families across America, it was a time when the dollar had to stretch not just for days, but for weeks. So, we adapted. We ate the parts of the pig that other people threw away in the garbage. We ate cheese that came out of a plain brown cardboard box door. We ate grease like it was gravy, and we drank sugar water like it was fine wine. And yet, look at the old photos in your grandmother's album. Look at the men standing by the grill. Look at the women in their Sunday hats. We were strong. We were resilient. And most importantly, we were full. Today, we are going to take a long, slow walk through the pantry of the past. We are counting down the 25 struggle meals that built our families. We're going to talk about the snacks, the gardening, the fishing, and the survival skills that kept us alive. Some of these foods were delicious. Some of them were questionable. But all of them have a story. Let's start with the absolute foundation of the Black kitchen. Item number 1. The grease jar. If you walked into Big Mama's kitchen in 1974, you wouldn't find a bottle of extra virgin olive oil sitting on the counter. You wouldn't find avocado oil. Those things didn't exist in our world. But sitting right there on the back of the stove, usually in an old metal Folgers coffee can, or maybe a soup can with the label peeled off, was the Holy Grail. Bacon grease. You have to understand the economy of the kitchen. Grandma didn't waste nothing when she fried bacon on Saturday morning. She didn't pour that liquid gold down the drain that would be a sin. She carefully poured it into the can. She let it sit until it turned white and solid. And that grease became the seasoning for everything when she made green beans on Tuesday. Scoop of grease when she fried eggs on Wednesday. Scoop of grease when she made cornbread on Thursday. She greased the skillet with it. Doctors today scream about clogged arteries and heart health, but back then, that grease was flavor, it was warmth, and most importantly, it was free. Number 2. The undisputed king of the struggle. Government cheese. I'm not talking about the little plastic-wrapped Kraft singles you buy today. I'm talking about the brick, the block, that long, rectangular cardboard box with the USDA stamp on it. If you know, you know. It didn't slice like normal cheese. It crumbled. It was dense. It had a texture somewhere between cheddar and rubber. You had to have a specific knife, usually the big butcher knife, just to carve a piece off. It was salty. Lord, was it salty. And it had a melting point of about 400 degrees. You could put it on toast, and it wouldn't drip, it would just sweat. But let me tell you, nothing on God's green earth made a better grilled cheese sandwich. When that commodity truck pulled up to the church or the community center, the line went around the block. Fathers stood in line for hours to get that box. We didn't care if it was processed. We didn't care if it wasn't real dairy. It filled our bellies. And when Grandma grated it up for the macaroni and cheese on Sunday, it was the creamiest, richest dish on the table. Number 3. The miracle of simplicity. Hot water cornbread. This wasn't the sweet Jiffy mix from the box that tasted like cake. This was the survival bread. This was for the days when the pantry was almost completely bare, and the paycheck was still 3 days away. All you had was a bag of cornmeal, a shaker of salt, and a kettle of boiling water. That's it. That was the recipe. Grandma would mix it into a thick paste in a ceramic bowl. She would form it into a patty with her bare hands, hands that were somehow immune to the heat of the stove. and she would drop it gently into a skillet of bubbling hot oil. Sizzle. It came out golden brown and crunchy on the outside, steaming soft on the inside. You didn't need butter. You didn't need jam. You just needed to be hungry. It was dense. It was filling. And it tasted like pure corn. It was the definition of making a way out of no way. Number 4. The Friday night special. Salmon croquette. But we have to be clear. We didn't use fresh salmon fillets from the Atlantic Ocean. We couldn't afford that. We used the tall, pink can. You know the one. You opened it with the manual can opener, and there it was. A cylinder of pink fish, and the bones. Do you remember the bones? The little round spine bones that crunched when you touched them? Mama said, don't throw them away. Mash them up. It's calcium. So we mashed them up. We mixed that canned fish with diced onions, maybe some bell pepper if we had it, some cornmeal or crushed crackers to bind it, and an egg. We formed them into patties and fried them until they were crispy. The house would smell like fish for 3 days. It got into the curtains, it got into your clothes. But when you put those croquettes on a plate with some ketchup or hot sauce and a side of white rice, it was a feast. It felt like a luxury meal, even though it cost 50 cents a can. Number 5. The dessert of the destitute. Syrup sandwiches. The kids today look at me crazy when I say this. They ask, you put syrup on bread? Yes, baby. We did. And we loved it. When there was no bologna, and there was no peanut butter, and the cheese was gone, there was always a sticky bottle of Caro syrup or Alaga syrup in the back of the cabinet. You took 2 slices of cheap white bread, the kind that was so soft it stuck to the roof of your mouth. You poured that thick amber liquid right in the middle. You had to be fast. You folded it over quick before the syrup soaked through and made a mess on your hand. You ate it standing up in the kitchen. It was a sugar rush. Sure, the dentist probably hated it, but on a Tuesday night, when your stomach was growling and there was nothing else sweet in the house, that syrup sandwich felt like a treat. It was the taste of making do. Number 6. And if you didn't have syrup, you had the simplest recipe in the history of the world. Sugar water. Just tap water from the sink, stirred with 3 tablespoons of white sugar. Maybe if Mama was feeling fancy, or if it was a holiday, she might add a splash of vanilla extract or a squeeze of lemon. It sounds sad now. It sounds like poverty. But back then, it tasted like nectar. We didn't have Gatorade, we didn't have juice boxes, we had a pitcher, a bag of Domino sugar, and an imagination on a hot July day. After running around outside playing double dutch or tag, coming inside to a glass of ice-cold sugar water hit your soul. It gave you the energy to go back out and play for another 3 hours. Number 7. Speaking of sugar, we have to talk about the chemistry experiment we did every week. Kool-Aid. But I'm not talking about following the instructions on the back of the packet. Oh no. The packet said, add 1 cup of sugar. We laughed at that packet. We added 2 cups. Maybe 3. We added sugar until the spoon stood up straight in the pitcher. You had to stir it until your arm hurt. You had to stir it until you could hear the grit of the undissolved sugar scraping the bottom of the plastic pitcher. And the color? If it didn't stain your upper lip red for 3 days, you didn't make it right. We had the red flavor, the purple flavor, and the blue flavor. Doctors today say that much sugar is poison. They say it causes hyperactivity. We just called it happiness in a cup. Number 8. Let's move to the meats, or things that resembled meat. Spam, the blue and yellow can. You turned the little metal key on the side, crinkle, crinkle, pop, and you peeled the lid back. And out it slid. A rectangular block of pink mystery. It made a wet sound when it hit the plate. Schluck. Raw. It was terrifying. It was coated in a strange jelly. But fried? That was a different story. When Mama sliced it thin and fried it in the skillet until the edges were dark brown and crispy, You put that crispy Spam between two pieces of white bread with a little mustard. And you had a lunchbox staple. We didn't ask what part of the pig it was. We didn't read the ingredients list. We just ate it. And honestly, it was salty, savory, and delicious. Number 9. The one we hated. The one we cried over at the dinner table. Liver and onions. This was the doctor's orders. You need iron. Mama would say, it's good for your blood. It'll make you strong. The smell of liver cooking is something you never forget. It's heavy. It's metallic. It smells like old pennies. It hung in the air like a fog. You couldn't leave the table until you finished it. You would sit there for hours, staring at that dry, gray meat. You would try to cut it into tiny pieces and hide it under the onions. You would try to wash it down with water without chewing. But you ate it because in the 70s, you didn't waste food, and you certainly didn't argue with Mama about the menu. Number 10. The meal that got us through the end of the month. Beans and weenies. A giant can of Van Camp's pork and beans. And a pack of hot dogs. The red kind, the cheap kind that turned the water pink when you boiled them. Mama would slice those hot dogs into little coins. She would throw them in the pot with the beans. Maybe she'd add a little brown sugar to sweeten it up, or a squirt of yellow mustard to give it some tang. It simmered on the stove for 20 minutes. It was sweet, it was salty, and it cost about $2 to feed a family of 5 doctors today. Hate the sodium content, but that pot was full of love and survival. It was a hot meal that filled you up and kept you warm on a cold night. Number 11. The white people's struggle meal that we made our own. Tuna noodle casserole. The holy trinity of the 1970s pantry. A can of tuna fish, a bag of egg noodles, and a can of Campbell's cream of mushroom soup. You mixed it all together in a glass Pyrex dish. But in a black household, we didn't just leave it plain. We added seasoning, we added black pepper, maybe some hot sauce, maybe some diced onions. And we almost always crushed up potato chips or cornflakes on top to give it a crunch. It looked gray. It was mushy. But when it came out of the oven, bubbling and browning on top, it was comfort food. It was easy, it was cheap, and it fed at a crowd. Number 12. Fine. Breakfast. Cream of wheat. Not oatmeal. Oatmeal was okay, but cream of wheat was the standard. That smooth, white porridge. But there was a catch. You had to know how to make it without the lumps. Making smooth cream of wheat was an art form. If you poured the grain in too fast, lumps. If you didn't stir it fast enough with the fork, lumps. Eating a bowl of cream of wheat with a big, dry, uncooked lump of powder in the middle was a specific kind of childhood trauma. But when it was made right, smooth as silk, with a pat of butter melting in the center and sugar crystals sparkling on top, it warmed you up from the inside out before you walked to school in the snow. Number 13. The snack that required a strong stomach. Potted meat. That tiny little tin came with the devil on the label. Or was that deviled ham? It didn't matter. It was all paste. It was pink. It was salty. It was gritty. You spread it on a saltine cracker. They say it was made of meat byproducts. We didn't know what a byproduct was, and we didn't want to know. We just knew that if you were hungry at 3:00 p.m. after school, and there was nothing else in the refrigerator, a cracker with potted meat would hold you over until dinner. It was the ultimate make-do snack. Number 14. The absolute rock bottom. The mayonnaise sandwich. Not bologna and mayo. Just mayo. 2 slices of bread. A thick layer of Duke's or Kraft. That's it. I can hear the doctors screaming right now. That's pure fat. There's no nutritional value. You're right, Doc, there wasn't, but when the cabinets were bare and payday was 3 days away, that fat coating your stomach stopped the growling. It was a sandwich of pure desperation, and we ate it with gratitude because it meant we weren't starving. Number 15. The divider of families. You either loved them with all your heart or you ran out of the house gagging when the pot started boiling. Chitterlings. The doctor will tell you this is a cholesterol bomb. The historian will tell you this is slave food, the intestines that the master threw away because he wouldn't eat them. But in the 70s, cleaning chitlins was a rite of passage. It was a ceremony. Standing over the sink for hours, peeling the membrane, cleaning, soaking in vinegar, dotto. The smell. Lord have mercy, it permeated the curtains, it got into the sofa. You could smell a chitlin house from 3 doors down the street. But when they were done, cooked down for hours with onions, peppers, garlic, and hot sauce, it was proof that we could take the garbage and turn it into a delicacy. It connected us to our history. Number 16. The parts that moved. Pig feet and neck bones. We didn't buy pork chops often. That was expensive meat. We bought the feet. We bought the necks. We bought the tails. You threw some smoked neck bones in a pot of pinto beans to season them. Or you boiled some pig feet until the gelatin came out and made the gravy thick, sticky, and rich. It takes a special kind of hunger and a special kind of skill to appreciate the texture of a pig's foot. It wiggles, it jiggles. It's mostly skin and fat, but sucking that savory meat off the bone. That was the taste of Saturday night. It was rich, sticky, and deeply satisfying. Number 17. The steak of the ghetto. Fried bologna. Now you could eat bologna cold right out of the pack. But if you wanted dinner, you fried it. You had to cut that little slit in the side, the Pac-Man cut, so it wouldn't bubble up in the center. But it still did. It curled up into a little cup. That little cup of hot grease that pooled in the middle of the bologna slice? That was the flavor zone. You put that hot, slightly burnt circle of meat on white bread with mustard, and you had a hot meal for about 15 cents. It tasted like steak to us. Number 18. The snack that fits in your pocket. Vienna sausages. Pronounce it Vienna. There was something slightly terrifying about popping that top and seeing 7 little pale fingers staring back at you in that cloudy jelly water. But we ate them right out of the can, or, if Mama was cooking, she chopped them up into rice to add some protein. It was the hot dog you didn't have to cook. It was salty, it was mushy, and it was a staple of every road trip in the 1970s. If you were in the car, you had a can of Vienna sausages and some crackers. Number 19. The old man's nightcap. Cornbread and buttermilk. This wasn't a meal for the kids. We hated this. This was for Granddaddy. After a long day of working at the plant or in the field, he wouldn't ask for a steak. He would take a tall glass of thick, sour buttermilk. He would crumble cold, day-old cornbread into it, and he would eat it with a long spoon like cereal. To a child, it looked disgusting. It was sour chunks, but the old folks swore by it. They said it settled the stomach. They said it helped you sleep. It was a probiotic before we knew what probiotics were. It was the taste of the Old South. Number 20. The meat that looked back at you. Sue's meat or head cheese. If you went to the deli counter in 1974, you saw that loaf. It looked like a mosaic art project. Little bits of ears, snout, and fat, all held together by gelatin. It was spicy. It was vinegary. And it was cheap. You put a thick slice of sows on a cracker with some hot sauce, and you had a snack that would put hair on your chest. We didn't waste the head of the hog. We boiled it down, seasoned it, pressed it, and called it lunch. Number 21. The breakfast of champions when the cereal ran out. Rice with butter and sugar. If there were no eggs and no bacon, there was always a pot of rice. Mama would scoop hot white rice into a bowl. She'd mix in a big spoon of margarine, not butter, margarine, and white sugar. It tasted like a warm hug. It was basically rice pudding without the milk. It gave you the warm energy to get to school, even if the nutritional value was absolutely zero. It was sweet, buttery, and comforting. Number 22. The free greens. Poke salad, poke salad. Now, this one was dangerous. This wasn't spinach you bought at the grocery store. This was a weed that grew in the ditch by the side of the road. Grandma knew exactly when to pick it. If you picked it too late in this season, it was poisonous. If you didn't boil it 3 times to get the toxins out, it would make you sick. But once it was boiled down and cooked with bacon grease and onions, it tasted better than collards. It was the ultimate struggle meal because it cost absolutely nothing but time and ancestral knowledge. It was free food from God's earth. Number 23. The parts that made the gravy. Chicken feet and gizzards. When you bought a whole chicken in the 70s, you didn't throw away the little bag of organs inside. That was the goal. The gizzards were chewy. You had to have strong teeth to eat them. But we fried them hard. And in the feet, you boiled them down for stock. If you walked into the kitchen and saw chicken toes sticking out of the pot, you didn't scream. You knew that broth was going to be rich and full of collagen. It healed your joints and filled your belly. It made the best dumplings you ever tasted. Number 24. The depression dessert that survived into the 70s. Water pie data. This sounds like a joke, but it's real. When you didn't have fruit and you didn't have milk, you made a pie out of water. Flour, sugar, butter, and water. You baked it until it turned into a sweet, gooey custard. It tasted like vanilla and desperation, but to a kid with a sweet tooth, it tasted like sugar. And that was enough. It was a magic trick, turning water into dessert. Number 25, tiro, the final meal. The one that defines the era. The wish sandwich. You know this one. It's famous in song and story. 2 slices of bread, and you wishing you had some meat. Sometimes it was just bread and ketchup. Sometimes it was toast with butter. Sometimes it was just bread dipped in gravy. It was the meal you ate when you were saving the real food for the kids or for Sunday. It represents the sacrifice. It represents the nights our parents went hungry so that we wouldn't have to. Now, we can't talk about how we ate in the 70s without talking about where the food came from. Because for many of us, it didn't come from the A&P or the Piggly Wiggly. It came from the dirt. The garden wasn't a hobby in the 1970s. It wasn't something you did for fun on Pinterest. It was a necessity. If you had a patch of dirt in the backyard, you were farming. Collard greens, mustard greens, turnips, okra, tomatoes. Do you remember the ritual of snapping beans? It wasn't a chore you did alone. You sat on the front porch with your grandmother. You had a bushel basket of green beans between you. Snap, snap, snap. That sound was the soundtrack of the summer. Your thumbs would turn green from the chlorophyll. You would sit there for hours, listening to the old folks gossip while you prepared the food for the winter. Because we didn't just eat for today, we ate for December. We canned everything. The mason jar was the original Tupperware. Canned peaches, pickled okra, chow chow. When you opened a jar of green beans in the middle of January, and it tasted like summer sunlight, you understood why you spent all those hours on the porch. You were eating your own hard work. And if it didn't come from the dirt, it came from the water. Fishing wasn't a sport. It was a grocery run. Granddaddy would grab those cane poles, bamboo poles, not the fancy reels they have today, and head down to the creek or the riverbank. He wasn't looking for a trophy bass to mount on the wall. He was looking for catfish, bream, perch, anything that could be fried. We used worms we dug up ourselves from the garden. We used dough balls made from stale bread. And when he came home with a bucket full of fish, the work began. Scaling fish in the backyard on a spread-out newspaper, the scales flying everywhere like glitter. But that night, when that cornmeal-crusted catfish hit the hot grease, it tasted sweeter than any lobster you could buy at a restaurant. It tasted like patience. It tasted like provision. But what about the kids? What did we eat when we had a quarter in our pocket? We went to the candy lady. Every neighborhood had one. The house with the screen door that was always unlocked. You didn't go to 7-Eleven. You went to Ms. Mary's house. And what did she have? She had the frozen cup. Kool-Aid, frozen in a styrofoam cup. It cost a nickel or a dime. You would flip it over, squeeze the bottom, and scrape the ice with your teeth. It turned your tongue blue, red, or purple. She had the giant dill pickles in the jar. Not the little ones. The huge ones swimming in brine. And if you had an extra dime, you bought a peppermint stick and stuck it right down the middle of the pickle. The sour and the sweet. The juice running down your arm. It sounds crazy to people today, but that flavor combination was legendary. She had now and laters, the hard ones that threatened to pull your fillings out. She had lemon heads, she had Chico sticks. The candy lady taught us math, she taught us how to count our pennies, and she looked out for us. If you were acting up in school, the candy lady knew before your mama did. Now, with all this grease, all this sugar, and all this salt, people got sick. But in the 70s, you didn't just run to the emergency room. You couldn't afford it. And frankly, you didn't trust it. So we had the home remedies. Big Mama was the doctor. The kitchen was the pharmacy. If you had a cold, you got Vicks Vaporub. And not just on your chest. You had to eat a little bit or put it in your nose. They tell us now that's dangerous. But back then, if you weren't covered in grease, you weren't getting healed. If you had a stomachache, you got the brown bottle, castor oil, the thickest, nastiest liquid on God's green earth. You had to pinch your nose to swallow it. And then they gave you a slice of orange to cut the taste. It cleaned you out. If you stepped on a rusty nail, you didn't get a tetanus shot. You got a piece of salt pork fat bound to your foot with a rag to draw out the poison. If you had a fever, you got sliced onions in your socks to draw out the heat. These remedies sound like witchcraft to modern medicine, but they were rooted in survival. They were passed down from ancestors who didn't have access to hospitals. They taught us that the earth provided a cure if you knew where to look. So we look back at these 25 meals. We look back at the garden. We look back at the candy lady. And we have to be honest. The doctors weren't wrong. This diet came with a cost. We called it the sugar. We called it high blood. We called it the gout. Almost every big mama in the 70s had a bag of medicines on her dresser next to her Bible. We lost a lot of good people too early because their hearts just couldn't handle the strain of the salt and the stress. It's a bittersweet memory. The food that kept us alive was also hurting us. But before you judge the menu, remember the context. We didn't eat this way because we wanted to die young. We ate this way because we wanted to live today. When you have 5 kids and $3, you don't buy salad. You buy rice. You will buy beans. You buy neck bones. That grease was a hug. That sugar water was a smile. That pot of chitlins was a community gathering. That frozen cup from the candy lady was a reward for surviving another week in a world that wasn't always kind to us. So when I look back at the struggle meals of the 70s, I don't see unhealthy habits. I see a miracle. I see a mother stretching 1 can of salmon to feed 6 people. I see a grandfather sitting by a creek for 6 hours to catch dinner. I see a community that took the scraps, the leftovers, and the bottom of the barrel and built a culture that changed the world. Tell me in the comments, which one of these foods brings you back to your grandmother's kitchen? Can you still smell the hot water cornbread? Can you still taste the syrup sandwich? I read every single comment because your memories are part of this history. Until next time, bless the hands that prepared the food and bless the bodies that survived it.